My name is Leanne Foster, and I am a Provider Outreach and Education Specialist here at WPS Health Solutions. And I'd like to again welcome you to our webinar for the Provider Enrollment Decision Tree. I do need to start with our disclaimer. So the material today is being presented and has been prepared using current Medicare rules and regulations. If you've worked with Medicare for any period of time, one constant is that those rules and regulations do change often. So I encourage you to continue to monitor CMS, official CMS communications, which includes the CMS website and the WPS GHA website, just to make sure that everything you're doing is within the most current CMS rules and regulations. As I mentioned, I am recording this session today, so CMS does prohibit recording that includes screenshotting of this material or this session for profit-making purposes. Again, we are recording this session, and what I will do, barring any technical difficulties with that recording, I will be posting that to our YouTube channel for you to view again. We will be putting a link for that into the chat. That's just going to allow you the opportunity to view this again. If there's anything else that you'd like to see, anything you missed, or share it with anybody that maybe wasn't able to attend today that may find this information helpful. In addition to that YouTube channel, we will be posting a link on our website. We do recognize that not everybody is able to access YouTube from their work computers just because of security requirements that we all live with on a daily basis. By posting that on our WPS GHA website, we do have an embedded player. So for 90 days, you'll be able to access that recording and the materials without having to actually access YouTube. So that'll be something to look for as well. And we will announce that in our e-news that we send out on a weekly basis. That brings me to our agenda for today. So enrolling a provider, whether it's an organization or an individual, it can take a lot of different paths and it can have different requirements based on specialty. Is the provider new to Medicare or new to the contractor? Is the provider established and they're just wanting to change some information? Is it time to revalidate the provider? So there's a lot of variables that go into determining what is the appropriate action to take and what are the correct forms to submit in order to execute that action. So what we have done as a MAC, WPS has created what we refer to as the Provider Enrollment Decision Tree. And this is a resource that was developed to help providers and their staff, whether that's billers or credentialers, whomever happens to be handling the enrollment and maintenance of enrollment records for that organization or that individual, helps them determine the appropriate application form. It gives them submission options. It's going to give them, we're going to provide them with information on what documentation is required. So during this session, we are going to show you how to locate that provider enrollment decision tree, and we're going to discuss how to use that decision tree. We'll show you some basic navigation and also provide a live demo towards the end of the session so you can see all of the pieces put together. In addition to that, I am going to show you a few other resources that you will have available to you as you're using that decision tree to help you identify documentation and some checklists that are going to help you along your way. There are a few acronyms, not a ton of them today, but there are a few acronyms that I will be using throughout the session today. So in your materials for this session, I have included a list of the acronyms that I'll use most often today so that you have that just in case you need it. Sorry, moved too far. So as I mentioned, the decision tree is meant to help you determine where to start. Oftentimes we'll receive feedback that providers are maybe not sure where to start in the enrollment process or in maintaining that enrollment information. So the decision tree was created, and it is a series of questions that's going to help you identify what you're going to need to enroll or make changes to that enrollment information. And it's going to tell you which application, which CMS 855 application is going to be appropriate for your provider and for your enrollment action that you're wanting to take and for the submission type. It's also going to provide you with links to CMS resources that contain the requirements for enrollment. So the Program Integrity Manual, we'll also refer to that as the PIM today. So those are the requirements that CMS holds MACs accountable for when enrolling providers or executing changes to enrollment data. And also it'll include information to help you identify documentation. Along with that, you're going to find links for supplemental forms that may or may not be needed. It really depends on what is happening with your provider or with your enrollment information. And those supplemental forms that we typically see often are going to be the CMS 460, which is for a provider who wishes to be a participating provider in the Medicare program, which is different than being enrolled. By filling out this form, the provider is agreeing to accept assignment on all claims that are submitted. The other supplemental form that you will see reference to is the CMS 588, and this is going to be for payments. CMS does not pay any of its providers via check. Everything is electronic, and in order to establish the banking information and to maintain banking information, CMS leverages and MACs leverage that CMS 588 form. Couple of other things about the decision tree that I do want to point out. It is going to account for all provider specialties. It is also going to account for both Part A and Part B providers. And that's regardless of whether you're on the Part A or Part B side of our WPS GHA website. The decision tree functions the same for both sides, and both sides include all provider types. So regardless of where you are, if you find the provider enrollment decision tree, you're going to get consistent information. The other piece of this, while it asks questions which are similar to questions that would be asked during an electronic enrollment process, but from the questions are asked in our provider enrollment chain and ownership system, also known as PACOS. The questions are slightly different. The questions are being asked from a much earlier standpoint. It's not leveraging any information such as the National Provider Identifier, also known as the MPI, or a tax ID number. PACOS would leverage that information to tailor the applications even more so. So I'll always encourage you to consider submitting electronically, but regardless of how you plan to submit your application, the Provider Enrollment Decision Tree is going to be a good starting point for you. It's going to be that best starting point to know which direction to go. So before I get into some of the specifics, I just want to spend some time on how it's going to work. So I will show you how to locate that decision tree here in just a minute. Go ahead and bring up our WPS GHA website, and certainly feel as though you could navigate along with me. I'd like to make this engaging, so if you want to follow along and navigate to that decision tree in this session, that is perfectly acceptable. So from the home page of our WPS GHA website, you're going to want to go into the Topic Center and Provider Enrollment. And from there, you'll scroll down to the accordion. We call these expandable sections accordions, to the accordion for Provider Enrollment. The Provider Enrollment Decision Tree lives here. Now this accordion might look different if you're on the Part A or Part B side. Here, highlighted in blue, I'm on the Part A side, so there's quite a few topics here. If I switch to the Part B side and go into that same section, it's just going to be a shorter list, but both of them are going to allow you to access that Provider Enrollment Decision Tree. And I will be bouncing back and forth a little bit from the website to my PowerPoint. I will be focusing on a demo, so you do also have those slides though for reference after the session. So the first thing the decision tree is going to ask you to do is to choose an enrollment action. It needs to know what your intent is by submitting an enrollment application. And we'll show you which options you'll have there. And then it's going to ask you to respond to questions. Remember, I said that this is question-based, and it's going to ask you questions regarding the MPI, the provider location, the provider type. And from there, it's going to provide tailored guidance based off of that. This is very much so, the questions are very much so response based. So the next question is going to vary based on how you answered the previous questions. So what I just showed you, I'm just going to show you through here one more time. You are going to select the Provider Enrollment Topic Center. And from there, you are going to then go into that guides and resource section, which is, again, those accordion style folders that will have that provider enrollment decision tree. You can click on the link to access that decision tree, and I will be doing a demo of that, as I said, but I'm going to show you some of the questions that you're going to be presented next. So once you select that provider enrollment decision tree, you're going to come to the first page, and there's going to be a couple things that I want to point out here. First and foremost, all the way through the decision tree, regardless of what page that you're on, you are going to have the option to tell the decision tree that you have the information that you need. If you select that link, it is going to take you back to the first page of the questionnaire. So if you need to start over, in theory, that will allow you to do that as well, but it's going to return you back to that provider enrollment page. Starting over is going to return you always to the actions that you can select from the decision tree. So the first thing it's going to ask you are going to be actions, and you have a couple of options. You can tell the decision tree that you are going to respond to a development request. You've submitted an application, you've now received a letter from the MAC, and you now need to respond to that. The next action is an enrollment action. So an enrollment action is going to be things like needing to enroll for the very first time, needing to revalidate, needing to make changes to your existing enrollment information. It will take you down a different series of questions because you're telling it that you need to take an enrollment action. So if you're setting up for the first time, this is definitely the action that you want. There are times that providers will just need to get assistance with that CMS 588 or that CMS 460 that I referenced just moments ago for electronic funds transfer and to become a participating provider, which again is different than simply enrolling in Medicare. This will walk you through the steps for completing those as well, along with giving you links of how to access those forms. If you choose development, it is going to take you down a path that it is going to explain to you that the decision tree is not designed for development. And here is the reason why. A development is something that is sent on an application that has been submitted to us. We as a MAC have reviewed it and identified either discrepancies or the need for additional information that we need in order to process it. Questions that we have or additional information that we have. You are going to need to always refer to that development letter. And that's what the decision tree is telling you here, so that you don't go down a path that is going to be repetitive or duplicative of an application that's already been submitted. So it will tell you to refer to that development request. And it does also provide you with contact information. I'm going to go ahead and go into that on the website so you can see that live. It does give you some contact information. So if you have questions about the development letter, the decision tree is not necessarily the best place for that. You're going to want to contact customer service. That number is listed in your letter, but if you don't have that, if you've received a different communication, say something from PACOS, you may or may not have that phone number in that email that you received from an electronic submission. So the contact us is just going to allow you to contact provider enrollment for any questions that you have related to that development, to be able to rectify that, get that submitted back in, and get that application back on its way. The next option that you can choose is going to be taking an enrollment action. So from there, it's going to ask you a couple of things. It's going to start asking you questions related to whether or not you are ready to submit an enrollment application or make changes to existing information. Again, bear in mind you're not entering your MPI number or your tax ID or even a provider transaction access number or a PTAN. This is the non-secure side of our website, so identifying information is not included. This is going to be purely based on the scenario that you're submitting for. So with that, it's going to ask you if you have a national provider identifier. If you do not, it's going to provide you with information to help you obtain one of those. You do need that national provider identifier. My apologies. There we go. So if you're wanting to take an enrollment action, this is that same screen. So it's going to ask you yes or no. So if you say no, it is going to take you to a screen for no MPI, and this is where you're going to be able to access the National Plan and Provider Enumeration System to enroll for an MPI, because that has to be in place before provider enrollment can process an application. It's quick, it's simple. You will need a user ID and password. This website will allow you to get to the identity and access system to get that user ID and password to create that MPI. And I'm going to go back one page. The other things you're going to see on this page include some checklists. So the first one is going to be a Medicare provider or Medicare enrollment checklist. This is a resource available on our website that you can download. And this is a very handy tool when you're starting out, especially if you have a new provider that you're enrolling. This is a checklist that is going to run you through the things that you need. Do you have PACOS access? It's always going to encourage you to enroll through PACOS. The decision tree is going to give you paper submission options as well. But if you've ever attended one of my webinars, you'll know that I will always promote you to submit electronically through PACOS. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, it is going to even further tailor your enrollment application, and it can do so based off of specialty information that you're giving it as part of its questionnaire process. It's also then only going to present you with the sections, also referred to as topics in PACOS, that you need to complete. It's also processing. It's quicker to fill this out. It also is ingested into our workload system much quicker. And an electronic application, we have 15 calendar days to process. If no development is needed, then the application is what we consider clean. With a paper application, there's obviously the mail process, and those we have 30 days to process. So electronic's always going to be quicker, and you're always going to see that encouragement to do that. But then it's also going to run you through the documentation that you're going to want to have ready in order to submit an application. IRS paperwork, copies of licensures and accreditations, whether you're an individual or an organization. The MPI, as we just mentioned, you're going to need various address information, ownership information. So this is just a really handy tool that will just help you have all of your information collected before you fill out the application, which will also make that process easier. Then we also have an option for choosing the appropriate enrollment application. Certainly we're doing that with the Provider Enrollment Decision Tree. This is a secondary resource that provides a lot of the same information, and it will go by provider type, it'll talk about the reason, and then it will give you links to the forms that you would need in order to enroll. And bear with me, it just froze up a little bit. And then the last resource available on this page is the steps to successful submission of a provider enrollment application. And this is really just the high-level steps. So applying for that MPI, as I mentioned, if you are a provider that's required to pay an enrollment fee, which will be outlined as we get further along into the decision tree, and then having all of your documentation and submitting the application. This has a lot of similar links that will help you along the way as well. So just things to be aware of as you're going through this without having to necessarily navigate them without assistance. So we talked about the no MPI. Let me get a little bit caught up. Once you tell the system that you have an MPI, the question it's going to ask you is, which jurisdiction are you in? So the decision tree is going to confirm that your application indeed does need to come to WPS because the provider is in our one of our jurisdictional states. So J5 is going to be Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, and Nebraska. And for Part A, we do have some facilities that are enrolling with us as part of what we refer to as the J5 national contract. So those are things to keep in mind. And then J8 is going to be Indiana and Michigan. And so you want to make sure that you are in one of those jurisdictional states. If you are not, it is going to, if you answer no, it's going to take you to a resource to find the MAC for your jurisdictional state. The process is going to be very similar as far as what you need to complete, but you'll want to refer to that jurisdictional state's website for assistance. Once it knows your jurisdiction, it is going to take you to a page that looks like this. And this page is going to be a list of all eligible providers. And I'm just going to go ahead and demo that for you. So I have an MPI. I am in one of our states. So it's going to give you this master list. And this is where I mentioned earlier that this is a list of all specialties, whether they're Part A providers, Part B providers. Some of our certified providers can enroll on both sides of that line, but it's going to list all of the providers. You're going to notice there's a link to the provider specialty, but there's also a link to the Program Integrity Manual, Chapter 10, and that is going to be the manual that is the regulation for all things provider enrollment. Not only provider requirements, but also MAC requirements of how they process enrollment application. That's all outlined in Chapter 10 of that Program Integrity Manual. And then next to that, you're also going to see a section, and that is going to be the specific section for that provider type. So for instance, if I were to click on, I'm going to click on the PIM, not the ambulance supplier piece first, but the PIM of Chapter 10. I want to go to 10.2.2.10. It will take you to the manual. Unfortunately, because of the way the manual is set up, we cannot get you specifically to that heading, but I know that it was 10.2.2. And I just wanted to make sure I was right that it was at 10. And these typically, depending on your software, typically are links once you get there, and it will take you directly to the ambulance supplier's heading simply by searching that number. And from there, you will see CFR references, you will see definitions of the provider, you will also see the requirements and the qualifications for the provider in Chapter 10. So you'll know exactly what will need to be provided. Once you go into one of the providers, and they're all laid out pretty similarly, when you go into a provider's link, so this is just an example, and I did a professional that's enrolling, you're going to see a couple of things. It's going to provide you with information on enrolling to bill Medicare and enrolling to order and refer only, if your provider specialty is eligible to do that. And then it's going to provide you links to information that's going to help you with that order and refer. It's also going to let you know if the provider can opt out of Medicare. Some providers choose and are eligible to opt out of Medicare, meaning they do not bill Medicare for services, they enter into private contracts with their patients. But then that's defining the provider and defining what you want to do. At the bottom of that page, what you'll see is then you have to select which of those options you're choosing to do. Are you enrolling in Medicare? Do you want to order and refer? Do you want to opt out? Or are you reassigning benefits? In this case, this is an individual provider's page. They have that option as well. So it's going to give you the options for that provider. So let me demonstrate that. So for instance, I will go into that professional provider. Actually, I'm going to go into a non-physician. So this is also going to that professional page. I clicked on non-professional. At this point, we're not talking about the specific specialty. We're looking at this is a non-physician enrolling. So again, you're seeing those same options that I gave you. And we are going to say that the provider is reassigning benefits. If you click on that, it's going to define what reassigning benefits means. And from here, it's going to give you additional options. So are you reassigning both to the organization is enrolling at the same time that the provider is enrolling? The professional is not enrolled in Medicare. The facility is not enrolled. So what's the scenario? I'm going to say no, the provider is not enrolling. And here it's going to provide me with the information that I need to enroll. It's not the application process itself. The only way to electronically submit an application is through the PAYCO system, but it is going to give me links that I need in order to start the enrollment process. So what you're seeing here is it'll give you a link to PAYCOS itself. If I click on that, it's the link to the PAYCOS login page. If I want to enroll via paper, it is going to be a link to the application that I need to complete based on how I answered the questions in the decision tree. I'm an individual who's not currently enrolled for billing Medicare, so I'm a new provider. I'm reassigning my benefits. I need to complete that CMS 855I. It's also going to let you know that electronic and paper do function differently. And if you click anywhere, whether you're an individual or an organization, as you go through the decision tree, because again, the scenarios that you land on are based on how you answer those questions, it's going to give you the option to enroll electronically through PAYCOS or through the paper form. The paper form link is always going to take you to the paper form. The electronic PAYCOS link that you see here at the bottom is going to take you to a page inside of our website that has tutorials on how to utilize the current PAYCOS system. So based on how we answered our questionnaire, this is for an individual that's going to be enrolling for the first time and reassigning their benefits. This third video, enrolling a group member initially, that is somebody who's reassigning their benefits, that is the video that you will want to view that'll actually take you through the process of enrolling in PAYCOS before you actually access PAYCOS and take those steps. Just a little bit more guidance for you. There we go. And I'm going to do my start over to show you that that takes you back. This slide is just showing you those PAYCOS tutorials that we have that are available to you. Again, that will help you with PAYCOS. The next piece is going to be to determine additional documentation. And we do actually have a page and a resource available for you that helps you identify the documentation. To access that, you would go to your Provider Enrollment Topic Center. And as you scroll down, again, we're looking at the accordions. This is outside of the Provider Enrollment Decision Tree. Okay, the documentation is going to be laid out for you in those PIM Chapter 10 references for the given provider specialty, but we also have a resource that's a little bit more centrally located for you. So under the documentation accordion, you're going to see a resource labeled Provider Enrollment Documentation. And if you click on that, it is going to show you a chart. The left column is going to be the provider or the supplier type. So this is going to be the specialty. Okay, and it's going to be regardless of enrollment action. So with documentation, you do sometimes have to ask yourself, what are you trying to do? If it's an initial enrollment, it is always going to be all of the documentation that's listed, and you'll see things like state licensure, certification, any adverse legal actions, IRS paperwork. Typically after an initial enrollment, we're talking about changes and revalidations. And at that point, it's an established provider, and that documentation is not required unless something about, say, for instance, the tax ID is changing, or say the state license number changed, or the effectives and term dates changed. Something changed. Then we need to see that documentation again. But if it's something you've provided with the initial enrollment, and nothing has changed about that documentation, you do not need to submit it in a subsequent submission unless we are, as a MAC, are directed by CMS. So that brings me to a live demo. I've navigated through a couple of things, but I'd like to show you the navigation for a provider from start to finish. So again, I've come out to the guides and resources page, and if I scroll down to the provider enrollment accordion, whether I am on the Part A or the Part B side, I'll be able to access this information, and I'll be able to access the provider enrollment decision tree. And I'm going to do a different action. I'm going to do an enrollment action, but this time I am going to grab a different provider. So I just told the decision tree that I have an MPI, that I am in WPS's jurisdictional states. And this time I am going to grab a federally qualified healthcare center. So it's going to again give me the links to Chapter 10. That's going to give me the enrollment requirements for an FQHC. From here, it is going to give me links to PACOS, and you'll notice that it has changed the application type that I need to complete. An FQHC does need to complete a CMS 855A. I'm going to click on the paper form. It's going to then give me additional videos or resources. Even with the paper, it does this with the electronic submission as well, but even with the paper, it's going to provide you with links to additional resources to help you complete these forms. Then it's also going to ask, especially with facilities that are required to do a fee, it will throw in questions regarding the fees and documentation requirements. I'm just going to click on the fee, where again, it will just provide additional information for you for that fee. So overall, pretty simple to use. Again, it is response-based questions to help you identify what applications and what documentation is required for your submission. At this point, you do still have to submit the application through PACOS electronically or through a paper application. We cannot accept applications electronically through our website. That is because this lives on the non-secure side of our website. But again, it's a good starting point for you. You will find in your resources today that I have provided some resources that include the decision tree itself, the guides and resources page that has a lot of good information for provider enrollment, both on the Part A and the Part B side. I've included a link to the Medicare enrollment checklist, which is going to help you collect all of the information that you need in order to complete an enrollment application, along with the supplemental choosing the appropriate enrollment application resource, which is again that chart for specific various providers, and then the steps to successful submission of a provider enrollment application. These will all help you get started and help reduce the need or eliminate the need for us as a MAC or any MAC to develop for additional information, which will make your enrollment process go a lot more quickly and a lot smoother. All right, so I am going to check in with Aline. Aline, do we have any questions in the chat?
Leanne, it doesn't look like there are any questions at this time.
With that, we have come to the end of our presentation for today. On behalf of myself, Aline, Karen, and everyone on the Provider Outreach and Education team, I'd like to thank you all very much for taking time out of your day to attend our session today. We look forward to your survey comments, and again, please be sure to include any topics that you'd like to see us offer in the future. Again, thank you. Have a great day. You may now disconnect.